So when it comes to the cyclical play, does that mean you would then be dipping further into Japanese equities, even after what we now see as being overbought territory over the last few days?
Yes. So while we still like cyclicals globally, especially on the back of the recent sell-off, as we're willing to fade some of the Delta concerns as we see peaking in hospitalization rates and we see rising vaccinations, but particularly on Japan, we're still positive. We have been positive for most of this year, but we still think that there's upward earning revisions ahead of us. Japan was somewhat late to starting their vaccination program, but they're really ramping up. So we think we still have quite a bit of reopening ahead of us that tends to favor cyclicals.
The other big headwind, other than, of course, Delta globally and what the Fed does next, is really what's going on in China, right? Is there an argument, though, that, okay, nobody likes it when investors hear that companies are being summoned by regulators, but is the fact that perhaps there's willingness for these companies, Tencent, NetEase, to go along with regulators and to make these needed changes something that should be comforting for investors?
Well, markets will certainly adjust. We've seen quite a rapid change in the regulatory picture in China, and that's why we've seen quite a bit of volatility, because it's happened fast. Markets are unsure exactly what the impact will be. Over time, just with, like you've mentioned, companies adjusting to new regulations, over time markets will also adjust, but it will take some time to get a better sense of how these regulations are impacting their margins and how these regulations are impacting their ability to grow. But it will take some time, I think, for markets to adjust and see what the impact on fundamentals is.
Alex, we are now seeing cacao, for example, falling in the Korea session after plunging 10% on Wednesday. Is regulation in Korea something that you worry about?
It's not something we look at that closely. As far as Korea goes, I mean, we're generally concerned more about what the global picture looks like. As if you look at just say at the index level from a Korean equities perspective, it tends to be driven by, or it tends to be correlated rather with global conditions in terms of global trade, global industrial production, what we're seeing in terms of semiconductor prices. And there we're still optimistic, and you see that the most recent export numbers were quite strong. Semiconductor prices are still continuing to rise. And so from at the company specific level, yes, but we tend to not get down to that level and looking more at it from the macro picture, and there it still looks relatively positive.
We have seen more foreign outflows in South Korea that's depressed not only the Kospi but also the Korean won. What's changed there?
Well, we've seen outflows across Asia recently, mostly driven by say foreign investor flows on the back of what we've seen around concerns from the regulatory picture in China. So we have seen some outflows out of EM broadly, say out of EM equity funds. And with Korea making up one of the largest country allocations, you have Korea making up a large country, of course, China, Taiwan are the three largest in terms of exposure within EM funds. And I think the broad flow out of EM funds is particularly impacting Korea, at least recently.
Healthcare is a sector that you're constructive on. Where specifically are you seeing the most compelling opportunities?
Yeah, it's very broad. It's very broad. You have healthcare providers, of course, you have pharmaceuticals. For us, it's more about healthcare innovation. When we're thinking about moving into mid-cycle, as we still do like cyclicals on the back of just still continued reopening around the world, but the shift from early to mid has been extraordinarily quick. And so mid-cycle, we're trying to balance more between some of the structural growers. And that's where we like healthcare, particularly around, like I mentioned, around healthcare innovation, healthcare technology that we think still has long-term growth potential.